Good evening, Bermuda. Today, I'm joined by the Minister of Health, the Minister of National Security, and the Minister of Public Works. Yesterday was a powerful moment for Bermuda. Thousands took to the streets to show solidarity and support for the Black Lives Matter movement, while demanding justice and the elimination of racism in Bermuda. As we march, we affirm that Black Lives Matter and with the rest of the world remembered American Black men and women who had been murdered by the state. It is clear that events in the United States have affected many, and I'm pleased that this government changed the laws so that a legal and peaceful protest could take place this Sunday. Racism in Bermuda isn't new, and racist attitudes still persist in Bermuda. Police brutality in Bermuda is not new either, and neither are police who may have racist views. December 2nd, 2016, and recent local events have proven that that is the case. There is still economic disparity between Black and white people who do the same jobs in Bermuda. This is our truth. And, of course, it is not enough just to talk about it, but we must continue to act on it. Bermuda's justice system is not colorblind. We have to make sure that we continue the reforms to our justice system so that the differing treatment of Black persons versus white persons inside of the criminal justice system is no longer there. This inequity is what led this government to decriminalize cannabis possession because the outcome of that law disproportionately negatively affected Black males, with 95% of convictions for cannabis possession being Black males, whereas the usage statistics amongst Blacks and whites are similar. In the House of Assembly on Friday, I said that as a country, we must maintain the energy to continue to fix injustice. It is my hope when we move forward with making additional changes through legislation that will dismantle laws, practices, and policies of systemic racism that negatively impact Black people. They will be met with the same energy for real change and equity that we saw on display this weekend. In April, then Minister Jamal Simmons invited the public to provide their opinions on current laws that they believe should be updated. The objective was to get public feedback to assist the government with updating, reforming, and repealing existing laws and introducing new laws that will benefit the people of Bermuda. Because it's important that the government listens to the people of whom it represents. And this online forum provides opportunity for us to engage in meaningful consultation so that persons can provide their feedback. Additionally, the Minister for Community Affairs and Sports, the Honorable Levita Fogo, will shortly issue a statement announcing that she has reopened the Bermuda race relations discussion. In order to move forward, we must address and improve the relationships between the various sub-communities on this island. Minister Fogo did open that up and it was engaged in with her ministry earlier, but she's reopening that consultation. And persons are invited to visit forum.gov.bm to add their thoughts to these issues. Before I ask the Minister of Health to provide an update, I want to thank everyone who joined the march this weekend. The vast majority of Bermudians I encourage were wearing a mask and, where possible, exercise physical distancing. And that is important. I also, however, encourage everyone who may have been out on the streets to take advantage of the free COVID testing, which will be available next weekend. And you can visit coronavirus.gov.bm to book your appointment today. And I'm sure that the team led by Dr. Amne Osran and Dr. Karika Weldon will welcome you there to go ahead and get your coronavirus tests. On that note, I will invite Minister of Health to provide today's COVID-19 update. Minister?
Premier, good afternoon. Between Sunday and today, there were 122 test results received by the Ministry of Health, and none were positive for COVID-19. This means we have not had a positive case for a full 7 days. Bermuda continues to have 141 total confirmed positive cases, and their status is as follows. There are 12 active cases, of which 8 persons are under active public health monitoring and 4 persons are hospitalized. None are in critical care. A total of 120 have now fully recovered, and the total deceased remains at 9. The average age of all of our confirmed positive cases is 61, and the age range of all of our positive cases is from 18 to 101 years of age. The average age of persons hospitalized is 77, and their age ranges between 66 and 86 years of age. The average age of all deceased cases is 74, and their age range is 57 to 91 years. Overall, 57% of all cases are Black, 41% are white, and 2% are other or unknown. The source of all our local cases is as follows: 41 are imported, 84 are local transmission with a known contact, 11 are local transmission with unknown contact, and 5 are under investigation. Bermuda's country status remains local transmission cluster of cases, and the 7-day average of our real time reproduction rate number is 0.63. Our reopening indicators will be updated today, showing that we are holding steady in our control of COVID 19. In fact, I'm pleased that our score on face mask wearing has improved, moving us up to the amber as our indicator. Well done, Bermuda. And on that note, I'd also like to commend and thank Mr. Aaron Evans for his collaboration with the Ministry of Health team on the reopening scoreboard. I was truly impressed by the images of yesterday's march with near universal use of face masks. Our team members at the Department of Health who attended the march to hand out face masks to the public, and they reported that there were very few unmasked individuals. We hope this responsible action by the members of the public will prevent this mass event from becoming a super spreader incident. We will keep a close eye on the reopening indicators to see how things evolve for the coming 2 weeks of the virus's incubation period. Until then, I'm imploring everyone to register with Health IQ and update your status frequently. And this is more necessary than ever following yesterday's one-off mass event. I'm also encouraging persons to take advantage of the free testing available through our drive-through facility at Southside, especially if they were in close contact with one of the very few persons who were not wearing a mask yesterday. And by close contact, I mean within 6 feet of that individual or individuals not wearing a mask and for a period of 15 minutes. As we head into the summer, I feel that it is an appropriate time to share with you some of the most recent guidance that has been produced regarding summer day camps and after-school programs. It can be found on the government website, and it is intended for camp directors, staff, and parents. It includes advice on how to make camps safer, reducing the risk of spreading COVID-19, and providing a safer environment for those on site, their families, and the wider Bermuda population. The guidance is informed by our own Ministry of Health and international organizations such as the Center for Disease Control, Public Health England, and the World Health Organization. If you're a parent, this guidance will tell you what the government is recommending camp organizers to consider to help limit the risk of COVID-19 transmission. The measures that can be put in place will vary according to the type and location of the camp. If you are a camp director, this guidance includes a lot of advice and ideas to help you plan delivery of a safer camp, such as safer access to and from the site, including drop-off and pickup, ensuring that there are no symptomatic people on site who may have COVID-19, safer child and staff ratios with physical distancing, choosing activities that limit the risk of COVID-19 transmission, and having a robust plan to provide physical and emotional support if needed. It goes without saying that children and staff may only enter a camp program if they are healthy, have not been exposed to an individual with COVID-19 symptoms, and are not under public health directions to be self-quarantined, or that provide additional services from private vendors for karate, gymnastics, dance, music, etc., should be aware that the movement of persons from one facility to another poses challenges to containing the spread of the virus. Therefore, camps should consider using remote platforms such as Zoom for the continuation of these classes to ensure that they are provided safely. Summer is prime time for campers to take field trips around the island. However, I must reiterate that the use of facility minivans or private minibuses to transport children for pickup or drop-off services and or field trips should be done safely with all the physical distance precautions. All must wear a mask and keep 3 feet apart. Operators can transport smaller groups to make sure that they can travel safely. Intensive hygiene practices should be implemented at the camps and are listed in full in the guidance on our website. More than ever, it is increasingly important to maintain high levels of routine, responsibility, and nurturing for children. Children and adults have been significantly impacted by the closure of schools, change in routines, and drastic social adjustments. As a result, it is common to see an increase in problematic behaviors, anxiety, and depression. As many mood related concerns typically present in behavioral disruptions in child populations, symptoms may include anger or irritability, frustration, crying, sadness, and limit testing. The guidance provides ways also to address these concerns. Another set of guidance which has been created is now posted on the government website is for babysitters and nannies working for one or more families in a family's private homes. If the family and sitter or nanny are in good health, there's no reason not to continue having them in your home. But each family and sitter or nanny will need to make a risk based decision about whether to continue their care agreement. If you're a babysitter, a nanny, or a family who chooses to bring childcare into your home, there are several actions you need to take immediately to protect against COVID-19 spread. These include practicing safe, effective hygiene measures, and the details of which can be found on our website at coronavirus.gov.bm. Temperatures of the children and adults should be taken regularly, and efforts should be made to avoid social gatherings where physical distancing cannot be maintained. If the babysitter, nanny, or the family live with a person who is considered extremely clinically vulnerable and should be shielded, then persons from outside the household should not be entering their home. If either the sitter, the nanny, or the family has symptoms of COVID-19, then the sitter or nanny should not report to work. Both should remain at home and keep away from other people and call your doctor. I want to note again that masks must not be worn and used for children under the age of 2 and should not be used for extended periods of time for children between the ages of 2 and 10. And for these and all other COVID-19 related guidance, I invite you to visit our website at coronavirus.gov.bm. Thank you, Bermuda, and stay safe. Thank you, Premier.
Thank you very much, Minister of Health. Last week, I stated that Bermuda would move to phase 3, moving to normal this week, Thursday. In addition to the expansion of services in phase 2, phase 3 was stated to had the following: the reopening of school buildings. As the Minister of Education announced, public school buildings will not reopen this academic year. However, private schools may open if they wish. The reintroduction of childcare services, according to the guidance from the Ministry of Health, the opening of government offices, the ending of mandated working from home, and the allowed opening of churches and houses of worship, and also gyms. Additional items which have been added to phase 3 are restaurants will be able to open for indoor dining with physical distancing being maintained and in place with limits, and also cinemas and museums will be able to reopen with 20% capacity with physical distancing in place. And these were items which were originally scheduled for phase 4. The limits for gatherings will be adjusted from 10 to 20 persons. Additionally, pools which were previously closed will be subject to the maximum limit of gathering for 20 persons and will also be allowed to be open. The final item, which I'm sure that a lot of persons are concerned about, is what about the curfew? The curfew hours will be shortened from 10 to 6 a.m., where they are currently right now, to 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Minister Birch joins us here at the podium. He has been chairing the cabinet committee that has been engaged in the difficult work of making sure that we reopen our economy safely. And that cabinet committee has been meeting repeatedly over the past few days and as late as earlier today to finalize the specific guidance that is going to be announced here today. I'm now going to turn the podium over to Minister Birch, who can give additional details on phase three, and certainly speak to any particular work that the committee is engaged in. Minister?
Thank you, Premier. Good evening. The Cabinet Committee on Reopening Strategy for Bermuda has made several recommendations to transition to phase three. I can confirm, as the Premier has already indicated, that we will move to phase three at 6 a.m. on Thursday, the 11th of June, 2020. In accordance with the originally proposed, public schools will continue with remote learning and online instruction through the 19th of June 2020, when the school term will end. Private schools will be allowed to open as necessary, providing they follow the guidelines established by the Department of Health. Educational support programs will expand to support parents who return to work during phase three. Care will be provided from June 16th to 19th. Government summer camps will open earlier than usual on June 24th. Private summer camps will be allowed to open following Department of Health guidelines. Childcare services permitted to reopen subject to public health guidance. Additional government offices will reopen with heads of department and line managers responsible for ensuring appropriate physical distancing for staff in office or continued remote working. Mandated working from home will no longer be required. However, it is strongly encouraged to work from home if possible. And certainly those government departments that are able to do that, who are incapable of providing social distancing, physical distancing within the offices, will continue the rotations. Church buildings will be permitted to reopen subject to adoption of appropriate public health protocols and for services with 20% of a sanctuary's approved occupancy. Gyms will be permitted to reopen subject to public health guidance. Public tourism pools permitted to reopen within prescribed maximum numbers for gatherings. Cinemas and museums permitted to open subject to 20% of occupancy and adherence to public health guidelines. And indoor dining, no bar services with physical distancing to include either barriers or tables set 6 feet apart. And as the Premier indicated, the curfew will shift from 11 p.m. in the evenings to 5 a.m. in the morning. The maximum permitted numbers of persons for any gathering shall remain at 20 persons. The committee is meeting regularly and will be making further recommendations that other activities be implemented in a new phase 3B. As an example, some faith-based entities have made representations for the holding of outdoor services, and the Ministry of Health will provide best practice protocols that should obtain for this purpose. There are several other activities being considered, and I expect there will be further announcements at Thursday's briefing as we look forward to advancing the economy and reviewing those items that are in phase 4 that can be moved to a phase 3B. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel. As I said in the House of Assembly on Friday, the government is now looking at safely reopening Bermuda's borders, which will form part of phase 4. As we introduce and move through phase 3 and phase 3B, the next step will be how do we make sure that we can allow our tourism workers to return to work and allow persons to visit Bermuda safely. As we saw last week, our government lab was able to test the returning passengers from Canada and get the results back within 5 hours. This was a great accomplishment for the lab and shows how we are able to quickly begin to put practices into place to test arriving passengers quickly and easily. As a government and a country, we are moving forward. We are following the rules. We are doing our part. We now have a reduction in the number of cases. Our real-time reproductive number is less than 1. We've gone 7 days without a new case. And this is certainly something to be celebrated. But we must remain vigilant. We have to continue to do what we have been doing all of this time, and so we can have the same results that we were having all of this time. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that members of the media may have.
Good evening, Don Burgess, Bermuda Broadcasting. On Saturday, a private jet was given approval by government to land in Bermuda, listed under urgent business matters. Under the current emergency COVID regulations, permission has only been given to land repatriation flights, medical emergencies, and courier planes. Why is government granting permission in special circumstances, and will this type of flight be allowed to be adjusted once phase 3 is implemented?
Sorry, Don, you would know that under the COVID travel, incoming travelers regulations, that all Bermudians and residents are permitted to enter Bermuda. I am aware of a plane that was repatriating a Bermudian citizen who's a resident of Bermuda that was meant to arrive this weekend. I don't know the specifics about yours, but sometimes people will see a plane and they think, why is it landed? But the regulations, the travel regulations, allow for all Bermudians and residents to enter Bermuda, and oftentimes they may come by private jet as opposed to commercial transport.
Have chosen to maroon themselves abroad during the pandemic, and now they're ready to come home. We know that we have a procedure in place, and it hasn't changed. If people want to come back home to live, they have to spend 14 days in self-quarantine, and this is a process that we are indeed holding fast to. If these terms and conditions are to change, we have a team, as the Premier just said, and we're looking at all eventualities. But let's be clear. There are a number of people that work and want to do business in Bermuda. There are a number of companies that have annual general meetings, and by their company's bylaws, they have to be in Bermuda a specific period of time of the year, and they have to do board meetings in Bermuda. And we have to be prepared now to put plans in place that safely allow people to conduct their business affairs in Bermuda. Remember, we are on the path to slowly open back up our country safely, and people now need to get their minds ready that they're going to see people coming to Bermuda, because we indeed want to get our economy open. However, we're doing that systematically. We are under Colonel Birch's guidance, and we're making sure that we have a prescribed framework that will be settled in the regulations that allow us to do so.
Before we move on to your next question, I would just say this, Don, that the practice that the cabinet is engaging in is that we're not giving special permission to any particular person. We've laid out the rules and regulations are there, and we're doing our best to make sure we amend and update them. I think there was a discussion last week to start to remove the restriction that persons who may be visiting the island, as long as they are following those specific rules, are allowed to enter. And we're going to continue to make sure we maintain that. But I don't think that there's anything nefarious going on, anything special. I know that the Business Development Agency, which is underneath my charge, as the Minister of National Security has mentioned, that has actually set up something, I think, with Cedar Aviation to allow persons who actually fly in to conduct their board meetings in Bermuda and to go ahead and fly out without even leaving the airport facilities. So there's a number of things which are taking place, but I don't think it's accurate to say that the cabinet has granted some type of special permission. It's not something that has been granted to my particular knowledge, and if there's any type of specifics or any questions, I'm sure that a minister will be happy to answer.
And Don, one last thing on the point. There are a number of people that are traveling on Medivacs that are for medical reasons traveling, and we see a number of flights also coming for those purposes. And you did not mention those in the list that you gave just now.
All right. Thank you very much, all three of you. Minister Keynes, when the Air Canada Airbridge flight came in at the weekend, everyone on board was quickly tested and came back negative. Will they be tested again in 7 or 14 days? And can you describe the self-quarantine regime and how it's policed, and what sanctions are for breaches or multiple breaches?
I'll leave the public health bits to the Minister of Health. I can simply say they're quarantined at home, and we have the Bermuda Police Service that are going by their homes on a regular basis, and indeed, and making sure they're at home.
In addition to that, Don, they are public health monitoring, so they are called by a member of the public health team to ensure that they are taking their temperature daily and charting their particular medical condition if one exists. And you'll also recall the legislation that we passed, I believe in end of March, has a very, very steep penalty, financial penalty, for persons that breach any regulations that require them to quarantine.
All right, thank you.
And they are tested. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. And they will be tested again prior to the 14-day conclusion. That's correct, Bremer. Yes.
Thank you very much. Minister Keynes, it seems plausible, going by the downward trend in active cases, that Bermuda could soon declare 0 known cases of COVID. That being the case, would you agree that it's imperative to put in place strict safety measures for visitors when the borders reopen, such as pre and post-flight testing like we're doing now, and weekly testing of all visitors? And because we could potentially go from 0 cases to reimporting the virus without strict controls and be back at square one.
Those are the things that form the basis of the discussions of our subcommittee, which is led by Colonel Birch. We are looking to make sure that when we open up our borders, that it's done systematically, it's done safe, and it's in keeping with public health guidelines.
Colonel Bichette.
I think it's fair to say that that's been the most difficult conversation that we've had.
Absolutely.
And almost every meeting
Mhm.
ends up at that place because that is the destination that we're headed to, allowing visitors to return. The advantage that we have is that the rest of the world is going through this experience as well. And so we are looking at best practice in other jurisdictions, and we've lifted some of their ideas already, as well as we have collaborated with all the key stakeholders in this exercise, i.e. hoteliers, the airlines, the airport authority, the civil aviation authority, and ourselves, so, and the Ministry of Tourism and Transport, of course. And so we will come up with a model that best address our needs. Don't forget that we are soon to receive the wristbands that will be able to track folk. And so there's a whole holistic approach that we're doing in terms of how we allow visitors into our country. But even though we have 7 days of 0 positives, that's good news. But it doesn't cause us to put our foot on the gas any greater by it in and of itself. The requirement is that we look at how we progress through this and get to the destination that we wish to get to. I think it's fair to say that the people of Bermuda have done an outstanding job, and that's the reason why we got to the stage where we could recommend some of the items that are in phase 4, and there will be a few others come forward into phase 3. And so we have to continue on that path of caution and following the public health advice.
All right, thank you. Along the lines, Colonel Birch, of the wristbands, how soon do you think we'll be getting these, and how will they be tracked? What's sort of the tracking device? Or maybe that's
That's about, I have it on my list to ask if we're still on schedule, so I won't speak out of turn.
That'll do for me. The update is that they are going to be here before the end of the month. But I know that that was the update I got last week, but they will be here before the end of the month.
All right, thank you very much. And then one more airline sort of question. With regard to reintroduction of commercial flights in phase 4, is the government considering targeting safe cities, i.e. locations that have low infection rates? If so, what cities are you looking at?
I'll answer the first part of that. Of course we are. And clearly that's what's driving how we go about this. We will reopen the airport when we feel it's appropriate to do so. Of course, we then have to encourage the airlines to actually fly to Bermuda. We are cognizant of the fact that the vast majority of cases, positive cases of COVID-19, came from the United Kingdom. So they won't be top of the list in my book of being welcome back to Bermuda. And certainly we will get a recommendation from the Ministry of Tourism and Transport about where it is that we go first in terms of inviting airlines to return.
Okay, thank you. My last question. Yesterday's Black Lives Matter march drew a great crowd estimated at 7,000 people, or roughly 11,000 or 11% of the population. However, there were a few people, as the health minister did mention, that were not wearing masks, including one who was standing right in front of me while I was filming, sneezing into her hand. What is your level of concern about the possible spread of COVID-19 during yesterday's event?
The key issues here actually is what you observed is that the vast majority of the population that participated in yesterday's events were properly masked. And I think that's a message that we were trying to convey to members of the public. And by and large, they all complied with that. I was totally impressed by the level of compliance. And I think that as the individual that you spoke about that was within your direct physical space that was not wearing a mask, the fact that the majority of persons were wearing a mask will provide some level of protection for Bermuda as a whole, and that anybody that was there, particularly in the space of individuals that weren't necessarily wearing a mask, should make sure that they monitor their health accordingly. And if they so desire, then they should also avail themselves of the free testing at Southside.
Thank you all very much.
Mhm. I got water, thanks.
From the Raw Gazette. Oh, yeah. With the news today that the eastern counties have been canceled for 2020, is the government prepared to make any decision on Cup Match, which is now only 7 weeks away?
You want me to go? That is not a decision that we will make. Certainly, we have spoken with Somerset Cricket Club, the hosts and Cup Match champions emeritus, about Cup Match this year. What I will say is that the club is expected to make a decision this week.
Oh, thank you, sir. Health Minister, I have one for you. What's our current status with antibody testing? I've heard of a couple of weeks where test kits weren't available. Can you walk us through where we're at with that? What kinds of kits we've got, that kind of thing?
We do have two types of antibody testing. One is being done by the Southside Lab, and the other one is being done by Helix. I do believe that the further supply, I'm looking at the Premier, the further supply that we were waiting for is expected to arrive this week, actually.
Righto. Yes, Mr. Premier, we've been heard on Friday in the House and just now from yourself to legislation coming to address structural racism in Bermuda. Would it be possible to get you to say, are we looking at anything in the general region of workforce equity coming back?
I'm not going to say that there's anything that's specific. I think that when we look at the fact, and you would have heard in my particular comments, whether it's in the House or my comments today, that we're going to continue the work of which we've done in addressing inequality in Bermuda. I think that everyone remembers the 2017 election campaign, and the mantra of the Progressive Labor Party was that there are two Bermudas. And so there's a number of issues and steps that have been taken insofar as eliminating inequality where it exists, whether it's inequality in education, whether it's inequality in healthcare, whether it's inequality insofar as access to capital to start businesses, or whether it's inequality insofar as opportunities inside of spaces for employment. So those are places of all of spaces that we have made progress in. When we look at the work of which we've done inside of education, whether it's additional investments which were made in education, whether it's additional investments which were made in training, or whether it's the fact that under the Progressive Labor Party government, no person in Bermuda is prevented from attending the Bermuda College or getting additional training and or certifications because they cannot afford it. Those are the type of steps and measures of which you take to make sure that you can do the work of eliminating past injustice and bringing more equity to our country. In addition to that, you've heard of the criminal justice reforms of which we have started to make, and there'll be more criminal justice reforms that will continue to be made. So there is a large number of things. One of the things which we spoke about as well, certainly when it comes to dealing with the Employment Act and matters of the living wage. So I do know that our throne speech in 2018, which is for this continuing session of Parliament, is still there. There are a number of measures of which were laid out, many of which have been brought, some of which have to continue, but certainly there will be additional legislation inside of the areas of employment and inside of the area of criminal justice reform. And the message that I gave to the House of Assembly, and the message which I've given to persons on my social media accounts, and the message which I'll share with the people of this country today, is that if we are going to march about Black Lives Matter, then we have to make sure that we are prepared to legislate to ensure that Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I can see here that for phase 3, we will be having public transportation fully operational. We were hearing last week at the union meeting that there was some concern about the numbers of people on buses. I believe the number of 17 versus, I believe it was 9 before. Can you tell us where we're at with that in terms of what balance of passengers is going to keep the bus operators comfortable as they do their jobs?
Okay. The last update that we got from the Minister of Tourism and Transport, which was provided to his cabinet colleagues, was that tradition from 9 to 17 has gone well. And I expect that we will continue to make sure that we are maintaining our hygiene and making sure that we are going to require that all persons on public transportation continue to wear masks. I think that's the best way to reduce any possible transmission of the coronavirus, recognizing that there's a small number of active cases of which we know in the country, and we're going to continue to make sure that we can test and detect any new cases that arise. But I'm grateful to our public transportation operators for accepting the additions and changes which have come from the Ministry of Health. And I think as a country, we have to recognize that it is important that we continue on the path and pace of reopening our particular economy.
Thank you, sir. Yes, okay, recognizing that the talks that are ongoing between the government and the unions representing our civil service are private, still, would you be able to tell us in any way where we're at with those discussions? Are we close to any kind of deal that's been reached? Has there been an agreement? Is it on the horizon, or just can you tell us where we're at with that?
I will answer the question in this way. I certainly do believe that it is on the horizon. I think there has been constructive engagement between the government team and the public sector unions. The Minister of Finance has made it clear of the economic position in which the country is in. And the one thing which we want to do is to all make sacrifices so that we can preserve jobs. It is a short, one-time sacrifice, which certainly is going to mean that public officers are going to be giving up their compensation. And the compensation is benefits and also their salary. Persons will, of course, take home the same amount, but are going to be giving up future pensionable earnings. That is the proposal which has been laid. There's been things which have come back from the union, and the ministry and the government is considering that. And we hope to arrive at something so that unions can take advantage of the law changes of which we made last week to enable them to have their various membership meetings with social distancing while people are masked in order to go ahead and give effect to the agreements.
Thank you, sir. Finally, and you're right, obviously the people are very, very interested to know what's going to be happening with the airport, sir. When we look at New York, which is very close and one of our gateway cities, perhaps you could tell us a bit about the scenario, how nimble we are in terms of if we see a flare-up in one of these gateway cities, it's very close, how quickly we can change things in terms of airport operations to react to that.
You want to? The one thing I would say is that the powers that are underneath the Travelers Act and the Quarantine Act, which are given to the Minister of Health, mean that these things can be done very quickly, and the Minister of Health can make an order within a few hours if the situation changes or if it needs to be changed. So those are the levels of flexibility which we want. But I think from a broad and general perspective is that we are looking to reopen our tourism industry. And I think that there are certain cities which have done a very good job. I think that that the entire state of New York reported about 700 new cases yesterday. And remember, this is down from the significant amounts of which they're reporting before. We can recognize that we can either require or ask persons to be screened prior to coming to see whether or not what exposure they may or may not have had. So I think that this is something that is going to be done methodically. But the fact is that the government is determined to reopen our borders. The government is determined to, as the Minister of Public Works has said, move to phase 3, to phase 3B, and then move to phase 4, which will be our new normal. And we're going to press forward with that. And the only reason that we're able to move this quickly, which is quicker than persons anticipated that we may have moved, is because of the excellent adherence to members of the public in continuing to wear masks while indoors and observing their various physical distancing, which is required. So that is the reason, and we will continue to carry those things over to when we reopen our borders to tourists. But what we have to recognize and understand is the laws that apply in Bermuda will be the laws that will apply to any person who is visiting the country. So the fact is that those persons will still need to do what is necessary to minimize transmission, even if they're tested upon entry, and even if they're tested before they come and are found to be clear. They still are going to have to wear masks. They still will have to be doing certain things to minimize any chance of transmission in our country.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Maya Plasti here for Media Maya. My first question will go to Minister Wilson. Many persons like myself were at the protests so my question is, when is the appropriate time to get tested? Like, should people get tested like the day after or wait a week to get tested?
Well, as we've been discussing previously when Dr. Ball and some of the other physicians were here, members of the medical community, the incubation period is between that 14 days. So if a person, for example, was exposed or potentially exposed yesterday because they were in close proximity for a period of 15 minutes with somebody that was not wearing a mask, then the advice would be to get a test as soon as possible and then another test within 14 days from yesterday's event.
Okay, thank you.
And again, you can get it at the Southside facility and just make an appointment or even just drive through and get it done. You can join Don.
Mr. Premier, so you changed the curfew hours, 11 to 5, but there are still many people wondering and not understanding why is there still a need to have a curfew in place? Can you please answer that?
Ms. Palacio, I'm sure you have been keeping up on my interactions with Twitter and the back and forth of persons who are certainly upset of the fact that we have a curfew. The fact remains that we still are under a state of emergency in this country. And what is necessary and important is the fact that we minimize the amount of possibilities for transmission of this particular virus. That can happen in the daytime hours, but it certainly can happen in the evening hours when it is far more difficult for the Ministry of National Security and his particular teams to police those particular activities. Persons, maybe holding parties and different things and gatherings with alcohol and other things, which might get a little bit out of hand, and persons may not be practicing the necessary physical distancing, which is necessary and required. We still have a curfew because during those 6 hours, we can minimize possible transmission of the virus, and that is the reason why those things remain in place. It is effective, and it is something of which we need to do until we get to the point in time where we believe that it is not necessary in which to do so. Now, the government still considers it necessary to do so to minimize transmission risk. The fact is that businesses are closed. There are many items which are closed at that particular point in time, and we want people to continue to reduce the risk of transmission, which can possibly take place.
Thank you. And I'd also like, if possible, can you please break down the reasoning as to why we can only have a group gathering of 20 persons max after having an over 1,000 people gathering at yesterday's protest?
Happy to handle that question because it's a fair question, to be completely honest. The thing is that was something that was issued under a public order notice under law, and it was something that was in the public that was supervised by the Bermuda Police Service.
Mm-hmm.
So we can tell and make sure that everyone is wearing masks. The fact is, Ms. Palacio, that in this particular job, many given days, we have to make the worst of the best of two bad choices. And in this particular case, in this particular instance, as a government that stands for tearing down the two Bermudas, we could have been a government that could have said, we're going to hold strict adherence to the law, and we're going to make sure that the protest doesn't happen. I'm not entirely certain that that would have been the best course of action. So what we looked, and as we discussed, we said that I'm sure that we can make a provision and ensure that we issue the rules and regulations that persons can adhere to minimize the spread of the virus. The activity was outside. There were things that were issued, reminding on physical distancing and requiring masks be worn. The organizers work with the Ministry of National Security. They follow the public health advice, and I believe that there is a minimum amount of transmission that is there. But the fact is that you and I both know that when people are holding gatherings and sets their houses, they're not wearing masks. They're not. And the fact is that we have to balance these various risks which are there. It's a lot easier to do when it's outdoors, when it's in public, when it's in the middle of the city of Hamilton, when there's people monitoring and making sure that people are following the rules. It's a lot more difficult to monitor those rules when persons are inside of their private establishments or others. So we have to make sure that we continue to keep that balance. I'm not sure if the Minister of Health or the Minister of National Security want to comment any further on the requirement for 20 or why we've decided to move to 20 or the various policing matters which existed.
I just want to add real quickly to what the Premier said. recognizing that the public health message has always been to restrict the groups of interaction so that we can prevent and limit the spread. However, the issues surrounding the reasons for the march yesterday are effectively systemic racism, which is a public health crisis. And the fact that COVID-19 just came in December and systemic racism has been with us much longer, and regrettably it'll be here longer. However, I think that, as the Premier indicated, for us to have tried to prevent something so powerful in a movement that was so critically important would have perhaps been the worst of the two evils, if I can quote the Premier.
Thank you very much. And coming from myself, I really appreciate you guys allowing us to have that protest. And my final question, as we continue to discuss Black Lives Matter in Bermuda, would definitely be to bring up once again Ms. Chevelle Dillon Burgess and asking just is there any more updates on her whereabouts?
I haven't spoken to the police commissioner about that investigation today. He and I will have a briefing in the not too distant future. We will follow up with him. I am sure if the circumstances have changed, he would have alerted me as an emergency. I do think that this investigation is ongoing. I would, as I said to you before, Ms. Palacio, that we have to encourage people that know something to actually call 211 and tell the police what they know. The only way that this matter is going to be solved is if somebody comes forward with something that they know. And so I would like to continue to invite the people of our country to do that which is right in these circumstances and dial 211 and share with the Bermuda Police Service any information that they know about Chevelle's disappearance.
Thank you very much.
Minister of Health, this first question goes to you. Can you explain how the RO levels can rise from 3.9, which was a couple of days ago, to 0.63,
yes.
which you just announced tonight,
In short,
with no new cases? How does this process go?
in short, human error. Unfortunately, there was an error that was that was made on Saturday with respect to the reporting, and it was picked up yesterday evening. And today, you would have noticed this morning, we issued a new statement that indicated what the actual numbers were. So it was purely a human error.
Smiling because it was the same question that we had discussed before the press conference when we came in, and that was the particular reason.
Mm-hmm. Another question for you, Madam. Using caution, I'm sure, my question is, do you think we've turned a corner, or do you expect once the borders open, numbers to change?
Well, I think that we've always maintained that because we've been able to control COVID to a large extent because of the quick action that took place as a government with respect to closure of our borders and the implementation of mitigating factors, which has helped us to have a 0.63 real-time number. It is likely that when we do open the borders, we will perhaps see increased cases of COVID. However, having said that, as the Premier has indicated previously, as well as Minister Colonel Birch, that there are a number of steps that we are looking at as a country so that when we do open our borders, there will be more mitigating factors to help to reduce the impact of a transmission of COVID from other jurisdictions, such as the use of the electronic devices that the Premier spoke about, such as enhanced testing. We've spoken about potential, we're surveying and looking into getting the new saliva type of testing. So there's a number of mitigating factors that the government is looking at because we recognize that we have to open our borders. The only way we could keep COVID at bay is if we never open our borders. And I'm sure you and I will be the first one trying to get out of here when, that time comes. So the reality is that's not realistic. But what is realistic is that we continue our aggressive mitigating programs to help to minimize the spread of COVID or the entry of COVID when we do eventually open our borders.
I'm glad you did mention the saliva testing, which is working well in New Zealand with only a 15-minute turnaround for results. So that's a good possibility.
Yeah, we do have a committee that's looking into that. That's made up of many of the physicians and doctors that advise the Premier with respect to COVID, and they are looking at securing that. And we're hopeful and anticipating that we should have it by the end of the month, the latest.
Just to let your moderator know, that was just a supplementary. Premier.
You're practicing for your future in the House of Assembly, Trevor?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Will there be an extension of unemployment benefits if tourists don't if we don't get that influx of tourists and quick turnaround once the airport opens, especially for the hotel workers?
What I will say is that there has been no decision as of yet to extend the unemployment benefits, which has been made by the cabinet of the country. When there is a decision to make any particular change, that'll be announced. As the Minister of Finance has indicated previously, that we are continuing to examine what takes place. But I do know that this item is on discussion for the cabinet's agenda tomorrow.
Thank you. I don't know who can answer this. Might be Colonel Birch. I got a question just coming in from one of my followers. And they're hearing nothing about curfews for boat owners. What is going to be the criteria for boat owners? With, well, as you know, this is the season, boating season.
I don't know the answer to that, do you, Mr. Cage?
There's a question about boat owners.
It hasn't come up. But
Okay.
I mean, there's a curfew at the moment, I
Up
think,
to discussion, then the curfew is to 7 p.m.
right?
to be off the water. As
We will have before Thursday clear guidance that will come out from the Ministry of National Security with reference to boats tonight to be had the high points, and tomorrow we will have the specific guidelines as it pertains to boats, and we will disseminate that with the public.
Thank you.
Trevor, there's been a few people who want to keep their boats out later. And that's and so your point is recognized and understood, and I'm sure the committee will take it under consideration. However, I know that there's people who are also asking for raft ups, and I think that is highly unlikely.
I mean, supplementary. This is this is a different. This we're talking about for fishermen that are out there and commercial fishing, right? Any leeway for them? Possibility.
The commercial fishermen and pleasure fishermen, there are two different sets of rules, and the commercial fishermen can clearly go on the regulations, and they will see that their guidelines are there.
Yes.
Sure.
The 7 p.m. does not apply to commercial fishermen.
Okay, thank you. For Minister Keynes, as we saw yesterday, an officer was suspended for sending inappropriate social media posts. Can you describe the internal process for dealing with such matters?
Trevor, I think words are very important. The officer was put on administrative leave in the civil service and in the Bermuda Police Service. Being on suspension has a specific connotation. Just to be clear, the officer was put on administrative leave. The process is as follows. The deputy commissioner is in charge of discipline for the Bermuda Police Service. In a matter like you've raised, the deputy commissioner will appoint somebody at the rank of a superintendent. The superintendent will put together, if the person says that they are guilty of the offense, then he will go to saying what the discipline is. If the person says they are not guilty of the offense, he will put together a panel that will hear evidence in this matter. And if that person is indeed found guilty, the superintendent will make a recommendation as to what the discipline will be. If the person disputes the decision made by the panel, it will then go to the commissioner for a subsequent decision. If the person disputes the decision of the commissioner of police, they can have the opportunity to judicially review the matter in the Supreme Court.
How many, can you answer how many officers are currently suspended with pay?
I can say right now there are 4 officers that have matters in the Supreme Court. 2 officers, as you know, were recently charged in the Supreme Court, and there are 2 female officers that are on administrative leave dealing with matter misuse of police, the police computer system, and a matter of under the Misuse of Drugs Act.
Thank you. My last question.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I do certainly appreciate the questions from the members of the media this particular evening. The next time that I will be coming to your living rooms will be on Thursday afternoon at 5:45 p.m., where there will be further particular updates. As the Minister of National Security has said that Colonel Birch has announced that there will be additional items prior to Phase 4, which will be considered as part of Phase 3B, and there'll be additional announcements that will be made on that at the press conference on Thursday. So for all persons, I want to thank you for your attention. I want to remind you that the only reason we're able to continue to move forward through this process is because so many of us have been following the rules and maintaining our vigilance. And that is the only way that we are going to continue to make progress as quickly as we can. So with that, I wish to wish everyone a wonderful and pleasant good evening. Thank you, and good night.
Licensed daycare center.